Ahoy, you salty sailors. Time to raise anchor and set sail for your best scrawny life. Arrgh.
Welcome to the Scrawny Life featuring trout. A rainbow trout, that is. An Oncorhynchus mykiss, otherwise known as trout. Yes, it's 15 minutes of solid trout. And those of you who are gentlemen and gentlewomen who dead drift, whoops, that one got away, who dead drift dry flies to stream-reared wild trout in spring creeks will find this video completely appalling. Oops, that one hit right as I was lifting the fly. Popped off, no surprise, flick it back out there, and another one's on just that quick. We'll find this video completely appalling, but there are reasons, albeit not good reasons, but there are definite reasons why we're catching these fish in a gritty, industrial gravel mine. Yes, there is actually a working gravel mine in this lake, on the gritty industrial side of Iowa's grittiest, most industrial town. You see, it all has to do with those two inevitable features of any decadent society: stimulus money and recreational drugs. In order to save the little banks that were too big to fail, the big bank, the central bank, had to make sure there was enough liquidity in the system for all debts to be payable. So the governments, the federal, state, municipal governments, became the filter through which this money was pushed into the economy. The state and local governments at that time were trying to find a way to combat the methamphetamine epidemic. Here in the Midwest, undeveloped or abandoned land played a role in that. So some of the stimulus money was used to acquire and improve public land, and then to ensure that the public did actually make use of it. That's where trout entered the equation. And so, all these years later, it has remained a popular program. And the Department of Natural Resources and the hatcheries, I think, also get some benefit from the additional trout stamp sales. Meanwhile, there's a lot of corn traveling by rail on this particular day. This load might be headed for Cargill and Eddyville, where it will be transformed into corn syrup, and from there it will be transformed into Mountain Dew. So this is the day after they were stocked, and these of course are not stream-reared trout. They're hatchery fish that, up until now, have only been fed feed pellets, so they are not conditioned to feed on insects necessarily, although they will strike anything that moves just out of instinct. Later on, they will begin to understand and recognize the insects and other food items that surround them in this environment as food, and they will begin to understand that the humans which once fed them are now hunting them, and they'll become a lot harder to catch and start acting like real trout at that point. But this is only the second day of their freedom, and we haven't quite reached that level of education yet. So although there were midges hatching, we're fishing a simple size 10 unweighted woolly bugger stripped along at a fairly rapid pace. It's an instinct bite, not necessarily one that's associated with the midge hatch in any way. We've got a big tray rolling through here, loaded to the very gills with corn. This one could be headed to the Quad Cities and then on to barges down the Mississippi River to New Orleans, where it could be loaded onto cargo ships and exported internationally. The rest of the world needs Mountain Dew too. Big train noise in the background. Looked at from another perspective, since trout cannot survive the heat of the summer here in Iowa, there isn't much risk of them escaping one of the places where they're stocked, one of these urban ponds where they're stocked, and it becoming established in the natural environment and causing an imbalance in the ecosystem. So there is a certain method to the madness from that perspective. Another thing that's slightly peculiar about these newly stocked hatchery fish, and I'm not sure how deep the hatchery raceways are where they're raised, but they seem to have a bit of a phobia about deeper water. When they're first stocked, they just run the shoreline, basically, and they seem reluctant to enter deeper water. Later on, they will overcome that reluctance, but at first, they seem to travel in groups and they seem to prefer shallow water for reasons other than simply food availability. Of course, temperature and pressure change with depth quite rapidly too. It just seems to take a couple days for them to get used to the idea of deeper water. So a trout walks into McDonald's, walks up to the counter, and he asks, "Does this restaurant serve trout?" And the guy behind the counter says, "Look, pal, it's McDonald's, not some Michelin-starred restaurant." So you see, it's a classic fallacy of four terms. The word serve has two different meanings. Well, never mind. Little known fact, if you connect the dots on a trout's back, it spells the words "kick me." So I don't know what's going on there either. Little known fact, if you connect the dots on a trout's back, it spells Cabela's.com on one side and BassPro.com on the other. So everybody's sponsored these days. There's another load of corn leaving the elevator. Perhaps this will stay within the state and be transformed into ethanol, after which it will be blended with gasoline to form corn gas. Now, certain strains of rainbow trout spawn in the autumn, and this weirdo seems to have been caught in the act. So, there's one in every crowd. If you don't have corn gas in the state where you live, you definitely need it, and it's likely your governor has been corrupted by oil industry lobbyists. How do you think I can afford to drive to all the different places where these videos come from? That's because I'm driving there on Iowa corn. Just make sure that you replace the gas in your tank with a higher octane blend before winter sets in, otherwise your car might not start. Anyway, the thing to understand is that the corn, which is being harvested right now in Iowa, does not, nobody eats that corn. We either feed it to animals, such as chickens and pigs and cows, to make them fat, and then we eat the animals. Or it's transformed into gasoline, or it could also be transformed into corn syrup, in which case you would drink it in the form of soft drinks. And the thing to understand about that is that the high fructose corn syrup has become like a byword. Like, all the packages of food in the store say, "Oh, this is healthy because there's no high fructose corn syrup in it." Well, the reason it's called high fructose corn syrup is that it was marketed as a health food at one point. It wasn't full of glucose or sucrose. It had fructose, just like fruit. So see, it wasn't really causing diabetes and all sorts of health problems. It was just like fruit because it was high in fructose. I mean, other than the fact that it was hundreds of times more concentrated than it would be in nature or any sort of fruit. But yes, in the 80s or at some point in the past, it was marketed that way to fool people into thinking it was healthy. So all the worry has been taken care of. You simply need to be a good citizen, believe everything you hear on television and mass media, and consume more corn syrup. Wow, calm down, Mr. Trout. Of course, in Minnesota, where the OU or OW, the OW sound, does not exist, it's pronounced trout. And some of the better rivers and streams of the driftless area are in Minnesota. Pardon me, I meant Minnesota. So, if you're ever up there and you're saying to yourself, what are these fools talking about? They're talking about trout. So at this point, there are 2 minutes left in the video. And can I think of another trout joke in that time? Probably not. So I'll simply close out the video by letting the trout speak for themselves.
What is going on here? What on earth? Hey, you stop that. Put me down this instant. See you later. Wahoo! Who keeps pulling on the other end of this line? I'm trying to have a little lunch here, not play tug-of-war with my mouth. Put me in the water right now. I declare you humans are the silliest creatures in all of creation. Freedom! Freedom! Unhand me, villain. I declare, if you had any sense at all, you'd have fins instead of hands. Aren't you one of those humans you're supposed to be feeding us? And now these humans with their corn gas, corn trains are pulling us completely out of the water. It doesn't make any sense at all. Do the do! This is an outrage. The ACLU will hear of this. The game is being played here. Is this some sort of a joke? Put me back in the water this very moment. You humans have to be the most troublesome